Welcome, everyone. I am Epiphany, and I'll be hosting this conversation with Fox from Whiskey and Dust. I'll give just a moment for folks to keep coming into the room. Great. So, Fox, what are your objectives for this talk we're going to have today?
Well, I was going to talk about leadership styles and boundaries and self-care, camp culture, and as well as goals and expectations and lessons that I've learned. And that'll be on the next slide.
So that folks know, we'll have probably 10 to 15 minutes at the end of Fox's presentation to take your questions. So please put your questions in the chat, and Sticky will be helping me keep those in a document, and we'll ask them for you at the end of this presentation. All right.
Next slide, Fox, please.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Perfect. Just a little bit about a Whiskey and Dust. I know that Peter introduced, but Whiskey and Dust was established in 2009 and it was created from another camp's resources, which was the Mile High Club at the time. We started with only 9 members and we worked our way up to a village distillery that had 250 members. I joined in 2012 and worked my way up to lead in 2017. And today we're at 70 to 100 members. We have 2 art cars, Ma'am the Mammoth and the Magic Mushroom Patch. And we offer mid to high end whiskey with no frills or anything. It's just straight whiskey, but it's pretty good. We also have a habitual yoga problem, as we like to joke, at 10:30. And hand jobs, which are apply manicures with a self-service washing station, and a lot of like member-driven classes, events, and themes like a bar martini lounge, goth night, Argentine tango, leg wrestling, belly dancing, whip cracking, whiskey cinema, and more. Next slide, please. So, theme camp leadership, and I'm assuming that there are people here that have not led a theme camp before and maybe are looking to do it. Theme camps are kind of like a business. In fact, many of the theme camps open up an LLC or nonprofit to manage it. The only difference is that you have a bunch of volunteers in a desert where anything goes. Things that you'll need is like leadership, communication, organization, project management, event planning, accounting, building and construction knowledge, interpersonal skills, and a lot of patience. Next slide, please. So I guess I'll just start with this by saying, what is your leadership style? And there are quizzes out there that you can take that will help you identify that. And when you think of a successful leader, what qualities do they possess? Now think of traits of a supervisor that you love, and are they the same qualities? Additionally, what strengths do you have? What weaknesses do you have? And can you lean into your strengths? My leadership style is a democratic leadership style where everybody who shows up has a voice in the organization. I try to cultivate an environment where people support each other, where we foster kindness and compassion, empathize with meaningful of the work, and treat each other with gratitude, integrity, and respect. I try to create a sense of belonging and achieving an individual as well as a collective impact. I'm really open that I make mistakes, and I try to develop a culture of honesty where somebody can admit when they make a mistake as well, because we try to support each other. I ask for feedback on how I communicate and try to incorporate those steps towards my next plan. And I ask members what my strengths are, and so that way I can really think about what my leadership style is. Every team is unique, and recognizing some leadership styles do not work for some people. So it's finding compatibility with your group. And then my leadership message each year is that this is an experiment. I have a 70-30 mindset where a lot of it's structured, but I'm open to collaboration, conversation, and I'm curious to see what else can happen. I highly recommend leadership courses if you haven't taken it, and just be aware that your goals are and try to consistently show up in that matter. Next slide. What are your boundaries and self-care model? I think this was the biggest thing that I learned, especially in this last Burning Man, because Burning Man is hot, dusty, and dirty, and being tired mixed with time constraints really does equal a breakdown in communication and interpersonal etiquette. So self-care is super important, especially when you're running around. So if you're an introvert, are you taking personal time to recharge? Are you taking care of your needs so that your battery's full and you're not as stressed? Are you leaving camp and exploring? And do you have a camp culture model that supports that? You need to communicate your boundaries, maintain them, and get camp members to support your boundaries. Fences make great neighbors. Next slide, please. What is your camp culture? Is it structured? Is it flexible? Is it disorganized? How are you organized? How do you play? How do you work? What does downtime look to you? And matching what you are building with the same experience that people are looking for. What is your member interview process and how do you vet them? I often ask people when they're first coming to Whiskey and Dust is what experience do they want at Burning Man? And I might not be the right camp for that. And so I try to match them to that. So if they're looking for someone more structured, I have a camp for that. If they're looking for more of a party camp, I know people who are with that camp. And do they have a sponsor? And are you matching your camp culture and expectations to their needs? So I often set expectations and communications up front. I try to find out what their commitment level is, because everybody has different commitment levels of what they want to do out there. And that helps me be able to navigate if they're a good match for us or not. People often want to help, and they might not be wrench turners. So it's also matching them for what their desires and needs and wants are as well. My model is that I have a lot of communication, and I also recognize that people only read 20% of what you write. So I have to repeat and allow for a certain amount of issues that may arise. I also have a team that supports me. So I have a camp liaison, a bar manager, an event manager, admin support, project managers, self-care support, consent leads, leave no trace officers. And I'm also implementing a lot more documentation and cross-training this year, because I have the thought process that there has to be some type of succession planning. And what does that look like if I take a year off? And what does that look like if I have core members who leave and that knowledge is lost with them? Next slide, please. What are your goals and expectations? Is there a guiding philosophy or vision for your camp? Do you have ways of measuring that and recognizing what the most important parts are? Do you test things ahead of time? Do you plan for things to fail? I know this last year we had this huge, amazing event tent, and the second day it came in, the tornado came through and tore it down. And I remember looking at it thinking, at least we have backup stuff for that, and kept moving on. Luckily, our team got together and brought something out, but it was a lesson moment where, things are going to fail, and is it going to make or break us? And what does that look like? Next slide, please. So my big lessons learned are not everybody thinks like you. People will do things differently, and I need to communicate specifics. Questions are just as important as instructions. Communication breakdowns happen under time constraints. The biggest thing I learned is I need to ask for help, and I start planning early. Acculturation of members were a big thing that arose this year as well. Being kind both to yourself and others. cross-train and develop succession planning. What happens, as I mentioned, when you take a year off? Not everybody has the same energy and bandwidth as you do, and this is a vacation. And so that brings me to the next slide. And we're open for Q&A.
Thank you, Fox. We do have a couple of questions. I don't know if you know the answer to this one, but the first question is, how does a camp limit liability or get insured against potential injury by guests?
Well, with my particular camp, I registered it as an LLC and have insurance on the camp itself. And so that limits the liability. If somebody is injured and with suing culture, if they decide to sue camp, they only get with what's in the camp. So a container and a tent and things like that. We do have a liability waiver for members as well. And that's my experience on it.
Thanks. Margaret, do you have additional information or comments that you'd like to make about that? You can unmute and let us know.
Yeah, I actually do have some comments to make on that. I'm a commercial insurance broker, and also I insured the event for 4 years. So I had the underwriters living in my camp for a while. That was exciting. But yeah, obviously forming an LLC is one way to do it for sure. But sometimes you can get more specific about what sort of exposures you actually have. Do you have an art car that you're concerned about people getting hurt on? Do you have a game people are playing where where you'd want them to sign a waiver? We had an assassination game 2 years ago where we made everybody sign a waiver in order to participate. And keep in mind that anybody can sue anybody for anything, but that doesn't mean there's anything to be won or there's any true negligence. The back of the ticket says you can die, right? And that's been held up in court actually as being sufficient, notice that if you decide to go to the event and you get hurt, you don't have a lot of recourse. Anything you choose to do out there is pretty much your choice, unless something happens that you can clearly show you did not choose to attend, you did not choose to participate.
Thank you. Thanks for hopping in for that. So Fox, we have another question for you. How do you get participation to be intrinsically motivated rather than quote unquote telling people to participate?
Well, I actually do it in a way that I ask people what they're interested in, and we have conversations ahead of time. So I get their buy-in early. And I also communicate that it takes a lot of work to do what we're doing. And so we need all the hands to come on board with that. With the new members, I make sure I vet. And so it's about that additional communication and asking questions and making sure that we're in alignment and making sure that they have that commitment level up front. And so when that does happen, then I have the ability to have that hard conversation with them later if there is a particular issue.
Nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get campers to devote to the camp's vision and gift versus what they want?
Well, I have both in my camp. I have our core portions of that where we have the whiskey bar, the yoga, the hand jobs. But I allow for a certain amount of space for people to be able to do what they want to do. And so that's why we have member-driven items. And we got leg wrestling out of it, Argentine tango, but those campers also help with the main part of camp as well. So there's many ways to participate. They help with chores, they help with pre-planning. And so there's a cross collaboration with all the visions into it.
Great. I'm in VW bus camp, and we just have that expectation that we're all going to participate in some way. And so folks have come up with their own ways, and some folks sign up. Yeah. Can you repeat the various roles? L&T officer, events, etc. think that
Oh,
was
sure.
from your presentation.
Yeah. Let's see here. I have a camp liaison, which was new this year. So that person's role was to go to each of the neighborhood camps and introduce themselves as well as our camp and let them know that, hey, if you have a big tent going up and you need an extra couple hands to come on over. And we established a great conversation as well as a relationship with them because of that. Bar manager is another one of our people where they're in charge of the bar to make sure that people are trained around it, as well as to make sure shifts are covered. Event manager is for the events that we have on our separate tent, so they organize all of that. I have admin support leading up to that, so that handles a lot of the applications, documentations that we need to do leading up to the burn. Project managers are for specific building items. If we need to do infrastructure items, that there's always a lead person on that. We also have build and tear down leads, self-care support, which I, again, thought was super helpful this last year. This last year was really hard, and that self-care support really made a difference. And then we also have a consent lead, and I recognize that sometimes as a camp lead, people might not be able to approach you. So it's nice to have a secondary safe place for them to go to, as well as a leave no trace officer.
Nice.
Can I
It's
ask
a lot
a
of
quick
it.
follow-up?
Yeah. I don't know who's talking, but yes.
Oh, that was me. I asked the previous question. How do you incentivize to make sure that people are excited to do those roles, to take on the responsibility? Is there a way that you, I don't know, incentivize those positions within the camp for the added work that is required to make it great?
Not specifically incentivizing. I find that my group, they're excited to do those roles. And so they get a lot out of what they're doing already. And that's part of my connecting people with what their interests are conversation. And so finding that balance, I put out a lot of communication around it. And so people are aware that I need help around these things. And so we start having conversations about what they can do, what might be a good fit, and then add extra support around that.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Someone wants to know how to handle people that say they're going to help and become different humans out there and not help.
This is where I learned to have hard conversations. And, I have only a couple of those that happen every year. And so there's a conversation partway through the burn to see if there's a reason why they're not showing up. Are they suffering from the heat? And is there a medical issue that I'm not aware of? Is there are they partying too much? Is their expectations different? Was their commitment level not what they were talking about? And so we have a conversation regarding that, and I let them show up or not. And if not, then they don't get invited back the next year.
Painful, but necessary. Did that answer your question? I don't.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Great. Thank you.
They're hard.
All right. Yeah.
Did you want to speak more on that, on what you were looking for?
Yeah, it was just this really interesting situation where I had a lot of new time burners, and we set the intentions even before the burn. This is what's happening. These are the days. Here's tear down. And oh my gosh, the commitment levels just weren't there. And of course, they're not invited back next year. But during those heated moments, it's like, oh my God, what? Yeah.
Did you ever find out why they were not showing up?
Commitment level, and taught me that I need to be way more clear and really paint out the picture for a new time burner of what it is to expect.
Yeah. Looks like Patrick from my camp is raising his hand if he wanted to add into that.
Yeah, I think what I want to add, and maybe it answers several other questions as well, is that I think, Fox, you mentioned we're a democracy. I think it's more a meritocracy. The fact that you became a camp lead is really because you're the best lead. And I think that's with every role. Everybody gets to the role because they're best in doing that. And if somebody doesn't step up, they get called out by others throughout the camp, not just by the camp lead.
Thanks, Patrick.
This next question might be also related. How do you hold those inevitable one or two individuals that always seem to disappear during Build Week accountable during Build Week?
That's a good question. I would have to say that during Build Week, most of my camp shows up. So I think the only time I've ever had people who weren't showing up for Build was because they weren't feeling well. And so there was extra self-care around that and understanding.
Somehow you're motivating them ahead of time.
I mean, there's been prior years where there was a transition from leadership. And the reason behind why people weren't showing up is that they didn't know what to do or how to contribute. And so there was this process that the camp lead felt like they had to do everything themselves. And how do you step in for that? And so there's a certain amount of showing people what to do, as well as aligning people with the know-how too. So a lot of our builders come in and they know how to do different roles, but we've had people who are not wrench turners. And so they're in the self-care team and they volunteer for that. And so, yeah, I think it's about aligning that, having those hard conversations and really getting that commitment ahead of time, and so that they understand what's going on, as well as cross-training too. A lot of our new campers have sponsors, and so they can lean on them as well. And we're really working on our acculturation model as well.
Would you like responses from other people as well?
Please.
Yeah, on that question of commitment on Playa, I'm with TechnoGecko. We're a mutant vehicle camp, and because of that, we meet and work year round because we have a vehicle to build. And 2/3 of our camp are local. We get together in person. Not everybody every time, of course. We have remote attendees, and we have a Zoom call as well. And the remote people may not help with fabrication, but they can help run the website and the email list and other tasks. What we found is having that year-round community really helps, because when people know each other, they're less likely to let their campmates down. So my suggestion for other kinds of theme camps that are not building year-round, maybe most of the focus is on Playa, my suggestion is have those weekly Zoom meetings in the 3 months leading up to August. And if you've got a big contingent from Europe, try to hold them at a time that is a suitable time zone for them, and require camp members to participate in the meetings. And that way, it's not so much a case of if you don't perform on Playa, you're not invited next year, because that's no incentive. The people who just want to cross it off their bucket list. But I found it's human nature. If people show up on Playa literally not knowing anybody else in camp, then they have no emotional commitment. They don't feel a responsibility to their campmates if they're total strangers to them. So if you can build that community before you arrive on Playa, you'll have a lot more commitment in that community when you get there.
Thank you, Stuart. Did you want to respond to that, Fox?
No, I think that's actually really great. That's part of our model as well. We start actually having Zoom calls. We've had our first one, and we started in January, December talking about it. We also have a Facebook group that we have a lot of chatter on, as well as newsletters. Most of our group is in Colorado, so we meet locally, but we try to have that Zoom call model so that way we can talk to each other and get to know each other more.
Nice. Okay, let's move on, because we do have quite a few more questions. And if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to put them in the chat. Has anyone ever had to get someone out of management who has control of contracts and communication with the Burning Man organization? What did you do? So Fox, let's start with you. And if you have comments in the audience, yeah, thank you. Wabi Sabi, put them in the chat, please.
No, I hadn't had the opportunity to get somebody out of management that was an issue. And so I haven't had to deal with that specifically. That's a really good question.
Do we have someone from placement in our room? No, okay. That would be one way to start, and contacting camp support could also help. If you want to add our camp support email to the chat, and also contacting placement. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Rap has a question. Has anyone experimented with alternative structures of leadership besides strictly hierarchical system, which mirrors the default world? I'm specifically thinking here about forms like sociocracy or other shared decision-making systems. And I'll add that we've had a couple of comments. It's really interesting how there seems to be a tendency to consolidate camp leadership into one person. Our camp has a very distributed camp leadership style where nobody really wants to be, quote unquote, in charge. And my camp does not believe in leadership, quote unquote, but community and equality. What are your thoughts about that, Fox, and alternative styles?
I've heard of them. I haven't experienced them myself. There's usually been at least one or two leaders in my camp. I've done the co-lead before, and that involves a lot more communication and similar leadership styles, which can be a challenge if you're not on the same one. I've heard some interesting ones where they have leadership for a day or people rotate into different positions, which is along the same thing that I was saying, that like my leadership style might not necessarily work for every group. And so it's finding that compatibility. I'd be curious to hear from the campers who said that they had a different leadership style and what were the pros and cons around that.
Gary, would you like to jump in?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can say something. I guess I suffer from a bit of institutional history in that I've been organizing Burning Man think camps for 26 years now. And that's probably more of a handicap than it's a benefit, but it allows me to give some insight to the event and how it's changed. And a lot of it for me now it's just age. It's like there's generational changes. People are different now. Things they need are different now. But when he came out to Burning Man in the 90s, Burning Man was about equality and community. On burn night, nobody was allowed to congregate around the man before it burned, but everybody was concentrated, literally concentrated. You were pulled away from the man, concentrated in center camp in en masse. We had a procession to the man to watch him burn because that's why we were there. And I don't know, about 5 years ago, I was invited by Crimson to be on the procession to light the man, but I didn't have any kind of official badge. And when I got to where the Rangers were looking at people, I wasn't allowed to go into the man because I was told that people have been waiting for hours to get to the man. And I said, well, I'm here to help light the man. And like, they didn't understand what Burning Man's about. And so anyways, it's like, I'm not concerned about this. I think leadership is so complicated and everybody needs to do what they need to do to make their things work. But my camp has been on the playa since 1998, and we've never seen a need for leadership at all.
Anyone want to comment on that? I don't see the original question asker in our room anymore. Thanks, Gary.
I'm happy to share just my experience having started a couple camps, and we've always been on the bigger side of, 90 to 150. Last year was 60, and we'll be back up to probably about 70 or 80 this year. And I think in a smaller size camp that has been established with longtime people, there isn't as much of a need for leadership. You've got a better sync going. When it starts to get to be a larger group, you'll have varying interests from different parties, and people will want to have their self-expression possibly become more the camp self-expression. And then you will have factioning that way, differing interests. And at that point, it needs a little bit more of a traditional leadership style. I feel like not very hierarchical, very flat structure as much as possible, but there's got to be a camp lead or a couple camp leads that will make the interest that's in the best, they'll make the decision that's in the best interest of camp, and let those people know that you've been heard. But the fact that you didn't get your way doesn't mean you haven't been heard. It just means there's been a decision made by somebody that is going to see all aspects of camp and know what the decision is to make for the better of camp and not the individual. So I think it's just related to camp size and the amount of time that camp has been established. Some variables there.
Thanks. We have a couple more comments, Generator and Gary, and then we'll move on to the next question. Generator?
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to add, I used to be part of a camp called Hammock Hangout, which had been around for 20 years. And there was not there was no leadership structure. Everyone kind of just helped out. But then when the guy who founded the camp and when he wanted to do other projects, it was hard to download his brain because he was the one who kind of knew how things got set up. And we had some challenges getting that information and doing the camp without him. We figured it out and it was really great and fun, but it was definitely, passing down that information is really important. And then we ended up making a new camp called Hotel Lobby because we kind of didn't want to do just a bunch of reasons, but it was a very difficult camp to set up structurally, and build week was very intense, and we wanted to do something a little different, and that we have a more organic leadership style that happened very natural. And it's just been interesting to compare the two, and both have pros and cons, and trying to have a good balance is something we're still figuring out. But I just wanted to share that to give both sides of it.
Walking a tightrope. All right, thank you. Gary?
I just want to quickly say that we used to be, before that great ticket fiasco, 2012, we used to be a big camp, over 130 people. So I'm not talking about sort of anarchists doing everything on their own, but actually anarchists working well together, because anarchists believe in democracy. They believe in working together. And I don't know, it's like, I'm not dissing any other styles of authority. I mean, in the default world, I am an elected official. I'm on the board of a foundation, nonprofit. So it's like, really, in reality, we have leadership, but I'm not saying that leadership makes you a better burner. I think I guess what I'm saying is, like, we used to come to the playa to make fun of the default world, and we've recreated it, just nuts and bolts. And it's like, okay, it's whatever people want to do is fine. I mean, that's part of Burning Man, but think about it. Think if this is what you really want to do. And I think that leadership and meritocracy are very problematic, because we're all more than we think we are. If we're free from meritocracy and leadership, we're better than that. We really are better than that.
Thanks, Gary. I'm going to move on because we have several more questions, but we could come back to this topic if we have time. I think we're going to extend our breakout time to 6:10 Pacific time. The next question is from Vanessa. You mentioned your leadership style is democratic. Do campers vote, or is it less official through conversations?
Well, democratic style is more about hearing everybody's voice in the style. And the democratic is just the name given to that particular style. So it's more unofficial. I started doing it and I kept showing up for it. And so nobody's offered to take on the full leadership in that sense. But ultimately, if you show up, you have a voice in most of the decisions going forward. Obviously, there's certain things that I have to make a decision for without camp, especially if there's a time crunch. But otherwise, as we're planning and everything, everybody has a voice in that.
Nice. Okay, so our next question is from Generator. How do you deal with camp applications and selecting returning and new camp members if you're limited to a specific size? How do you turn people away, specifically those who have camped with you before?
Well, when we're specific size, I've noticed that there's a little bit of fluidity. People can ask to join ahead of time and then they can't make it partway through the year of the planning. And so I've not necessarily had to turn anyone away in the last few years because there's always room. So I have a waiting list for those. And just trying to communicate that out as well, like things shift around, especially June to August. And so eventually I get everybody in that wants to be a participant.
Nice. The next question is from Greg. How does your sponsor model work?
A sponsor model is basically when you apply to camp, you have somebody that you know that is part of Whiskey and Dust, and they're your main point of contact outside of leadership. And they put in that extra bit of cushion. So they help you with getting things set up, making sure you have all the supplies, and being your cheerleader essentially in that. And when you come to camp, then you always have at least somebody that you know that you can lean on. I always make sure that I also check in throughout the year. Is your sponsor meeting up with you? Do you have any expectations? We also have acculturation meetings as well, where a couple of our members go through about camp culture and expectations, especially if you're a virgin.
All right.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, Greg. Thank you.
Who and how do people become sponsors? Is it somebody who's been like with you guys 2 years in a row or 3 years in a row? Or is it just somebody who's been with you once before?
Been once before. So if you've shown up and you say, hey, I have this friend that I want to bring in, and I'll ask, do you want to sponsor them? And they're like, absolutely. And so it's just an extra person to help handle them coming into the camp.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question is from Playa Maya from Ashram Galactica. We are exploring an operational board structure with an electoral process. We have a strong GM and lead structure that has worked well since 2005. We are exploring this to be more inclusive and transparent in decision-making, share the workload, and channel the desire to contribute most constructively. Would love any and all the advice and lessons learned from anyone who has gone through the process. Fox?
Well, with our model, we do have a bit of a board in the sense that a lot of these roles come in and talk, as well as the open camp meetings. So my model is just more or less making sure it's open and people are able to talk through it. But I would love to hear from other camp leads as well.
Anybody want to comment?
I don't know how to raise my hand.
That's okay. That's all right. Thanks, Margaret. Go ahead.
Okay. No, just it, it's a little bit easier because we have like 30 or 40 people. But if you are one of our campmates in good standing and you sponsor somebody, you already know the vibe of our camp, right? You know that we all work very hard and that we all also, fun really hard. And so if you want to bring somebody in, it's going to reflect really poorly on you if it's somebody that isn't going to mesh with that vibe. And so when people do say, hey, my friend Susie really wants to come to Burning Man, and if they camped with us, I always frame it as like, we are hard to love because we aren't just super happy party fun time. What do we always make the new person that's being proposed actually send the whole camp an email describing what they're looking for, describing what they've heard, what they think Burning Man's all about, and what they're planning to contribute to camp. And, we get so many where people are just like, I bring good vibes, and that's great. But then when somebody says, I can make dinner for 50 people, that gets the gold star, The way that we're set up in our camp is that we know people that have consistently done a bad job of bringing new people. They bring people that maybe aren't a great fit for us. And so we ask them not to do that anymore.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Sean.
We always do. We have a specific thing we do, right? I'm Rhythm Wave. We build a big dance floor, and we all support the dance floor. So when there's new people coming to camp, we always do an interview process prior on the phone or something. And then that gives us a chance to spell out what we expect from the people that come to our camp. And then they can choose to continue to seek joining us or not.
Nice. Yeah, it's good to get a sense of people that way. Okay. Fox, our next question comes from Kevin from Hoverlandia. He's looking for tips on dealing with newbies.
Newbies to camp or virgins?
Newbies to camp. He's from Hoverlandia. They're required by the org to take anyone in who came on the bus.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Virgins.
Got it. Thank you, Kevin. Well, I think I've talked about the process where we have our vetting to start with, and then we have our education around that as well as the sponsorship. So there's different levels of that. We're also adding more into the acculturation this year because we had an interesting experience with this burn where there was more new people that have never been to the burn or never been to our camp before. And so we had a lot of lessons learned that we need to have more education on what our camp culture is and add in more layers so that people are better equipped when they arrive.
Nice. I bet there are some other folks who have tips for dealing with new people at Burning Man.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Yeah, Gary.
First time, I don't call first time burners newbies or whatever else. It's like these people are coming to Burning Man with so much. They're not an empty slate. These are people who are bringing cool stuff to your camp and to the event. Most treat them with respect. Again, it's like I've been doing this camp quote unquote leadership thing for a long time now. And I find our first time burners are the most important people in my camp because they have so much to add. Their enthusiasm, their imagination, it's awesome. It's like, no, treat your newbies, treat your first time burners with great respect and listen to them because they'll teach you stuff too.
Nice. Lee?
Running a camp for the last 11 years, my biggest problem used to be that I didn't know how to make people read. So the noobs, we do call them that, when they come to camp, it's so tough to know if they read all the materials that we sent out. So last year, somebody told me something really clever. He said, you don't need to find out you don't need to force them to read. You just need to ask them the right questions, give a test. So it could be as simple as, what's your favorite principle? And just by asking that question, now they have to go and check out all the principles and decide which one is their favorite run. So if you ask the right questions in the applications and all your materials, then people will be encouraged and sometimes forced to find the material that you want them to know.
Thank you.
That's it.
Rick? Rick, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, I
There you go.
dialed in. Yeah, we did something similar where we started with a pre-survey. What is your favorite principle, to see what everybody put down, and saw some common themes, especially amongst those who are new. Also, what do they hope to contribute, and what do they bring to the camp? But then for those that are new to the playa completely, we did a separate meeting with them, and basically I took on the role of trying to scare the crap out of them. And once they felt comfortable with what they knew they were going to be exposed to, both with our camp culture, with the environment, and so on, and felt that they were as prepared as possible to attend, making it lighthearted and but also trying to learn something about some of these new people, so that when we went back to our camp meetings, and this is an international camp, by the way, we have people from Finland as well as people in the San Francisco Bay Area, that we could then better discuss who might be a good fit in certain roles, as well as preparing those people for the camp.
Nice. Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Katie. How do you approach camp dues, including budgeting dues for advance payment, the ratio of dues to fundraising? Are there dues tiers based on effort for things like early arrival, etc.? What do you say, Fox?
Well, the model that we have is that we have a budget meeting at the beginning of the year, and we as a group decide what our goals are, what items that we want to have, like water or lights, or do we want to buy a new tent this year and things like that. So that's voted on as a group. And so everybody is on board with that. And then I also have tiers, not on an effort level, but basically if last year we had a assisted one where if COVID was really hard and you can't afford the full dues, then you just let me know and we'll put you into the lower due area. And if you've had a really good year and you feel like being generous, then we had a third due option that allowed for that. I find that early entry is a coveted item in itself. So that's kind of the reward. If you come and help build, you get to come in early and set up yourself early and be part of that experience, as well as seeing the city be built, which I, for a lot of our people, is one of their favorite things about the burn. But that's our model. I would love to hear from somebody else if they have a different model.
And also, we only have 3 minutes left. I wanted to circle back to Maya Playa. They want to know, does anyone have experience with setting up an elective board, and how does the board work with the GM leads and lead structure? So more specific details on that question.
I'll go ahead and open it up to the floor if anybody has any specifics around that.
Lee, you have your hand raised. I don't know if that's from your last participation or not. Okay. Does anybody in the room have an answer for that? It looks like that might be a good one too to bring forward.
I have.
Yeah. Okay, Sparky.
So I've done the same thing with the makerspace, all the way to turn it into a 501c3. So I was actually going to throw my email in the chat. So Maya, if you want to reach out to me directly, there are a bunch of pieces to it. It's not as complicated or as scary as everybody makes it sound, but there are a handful of pieces to it.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I can also add to that. We just set up a 501c3 for our organization, but for Burning Man for a camp, you actually want to set up a 501c7, which is made for social organizations. Has some very distinct differences, and it really depends on the structure of your camp, what you're doing, and what your gift to the playa is. If you're a true arts organization, really bringing art to the playa, you might want to consider a 501c3 or 501c7 if you're kind of more of a social organization, such as a camp. I would definitely consult with your tax professional, because they all have unique tax implications in the way in which your members give. But it is, you can definitely explore both, but it would be really kind of the structure of your camp and what you're doing.
Thank you, Regular. And I'd like to thank Fox for being our room speaker this evening. Our breakouts are over, and we'll all go back to the main room now for some more presentation from our invited speakers.